This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, we've packed a number of shows together to give you some highlights. I know you're going to enjoy the show. Thank you for being with us today. Man, we are jumping into a series of topics over the next few days. One topic, main topic, that's maybe different than what you expect, but maybe something you need to learn more about. We're all trying to get in front of more investors, right? We're all trying to gain more clients and get them in the door so we can follow up, right? And we can gain their trust, right? So they can invest with us. And our guest today is Dan Barrett. He's the head nerd at Adwords Nerds, the world's largest Google partner agency working only with real estate investors. He's managed over $5 million a year in client ad spend, found hundreds of real estate deals online for his clients, and been behind extensive industry experimentation and original research. He's the voice behind the REI Marketing Nerds podcast, over 150 episodes strong with a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and the AdWords Nerds YouTube channel. Dan and I have a great time. We jump through numerous parts of advertising and specifically Google Ads, but he even goes into numerous different platforms in some of the segments that I know you're going to want to hear about and you're going to learn about. We're going to talk about him some in the beginning, but then get into what Google Ads are and maybe why you should know what they are. Can they help your business? Is it something you should be spending money on? You're going to learn that today and over the next 3 days with Dan and I. Dan, welcome to the show. Honored to have you on and to learn more about this thing called AdWords that you are an expert in. That seems like for some reason I need to know something about it. So I'm glad to have you here because I'm afraid the listeners might need to know something about it as well. And you are the expert. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I appreciate it. You said that in the exact same tone of voice that I talk about like my gut health, where I'm like, I keep hearing that I'm supposed to have a biome and I don't really want to know about it, but maybe I do. So I appreciate it. I will do my best to make it as painless as humanly possible.
Yeah, I'm just giving you a hard time at the same time, and I'm grateful for your humor around it. But you're an expert in this thing called AdWords, and I want to jump into that. I want to learn a little more about Dan, though, right before we do. Who is Dan Barrett? Give us a little more background on yourself and getting into this space of AdWords. What'd you do before?
Yeah, thanks a lot. So my main gig today is I'm CEO of a company called Adwords Nerds, which is an online marketing company. We only work with real estate investors. It's been about a decade doing that. And even within that, really only focusing on motivated seller leads. My trajectory to get here was a little weird. Initially, I was in school to become a teacher. I wanted to teach history. So I was getting my master's degree in education. I've got a master's degree in history and was working at public schools, that kind of thing. And in that process, kind of just in the background, I'd been playing music, right? I've been playing music with friends ever since I was in high school. That's just been a big part of my life. And through music, I was sort of forced to be the one that was, there always needs to be a guy in the band who's like going to watch the box of money. You got like a little plastic box where you put your money, or you're going to make t-shirts, or you're going to make CDs, you got to sell those things, or you need a website, you need to make a website to promote the band. So I was always that guy. And over time, it just developed this weird hodgepodge of skills for, essentially what is online marketing. And so when I was training to be a teacher, I was doing my student teaching, I was working as a paraprofessional with special needs kids and sort of kids with a lot of behavioral issues. I was working in after school programs, like I was doing the whole thing and not making a ton of money. Like public schooling, although it is the noblest of professions, is not a particularly high paying, right? So I was like, I need to make some extra cash. I started freelancing and just doing some basic online marketing for local businesses, my local pizza place. I worked with like an ambulance company, like all sorts of random stuff. And I realized about a year in that I was making more freelancing than I would have about 3 years into a full-time teaching position, right? And at the time, it was really hard to find teaching position for history. So with the support of my fiance and now wife, I was like, I'm going to jump in and try to make this work, and spent a couple years just honing my skill set with local businesses. And I knew in that process that I wanted to focus. Like I wanted a narrow focus. I wanted to be the best in the world at something. And I like to think of myself as fairly self-aware. So if you're listening to this, you're not watching me right now, I'm not like the world's most handsome man. I'm not going to be the strongest dude. I'm not like, there's a lot of things I'm not going to necessarily, basketball career, probably not in my future. But I was like, if I focus and I really, really know a narrow field, I can be the best at it, right? So I had decided, okay, I want to focus on somebody, a particular niche. And I had a couple of real estate investor clients just sort of randomly, actually Dan Schwartz, who went on to found Investor Fuse, was one of my first ever real estate investor clients. It sort of showed me what real estate investing was all about. And I'd had some success running ads for him, getting deals, getting motivated seller leads. So that's kind of in the background of my head. And I made this commitment. I was like, okay, I'm going to pay. It was the most money I'd ever spent on anything at that time. $10,000, which was an unheard of an amount for young Dan Barrett, to go to a Tony Robbins business seminar. And at this seminar, I was like, I will pick my niche, my focus. And I ended up sitting all the way in the back because I didn't know anything about Tony Robbins other than he made people dance. And I was like, I do not want to dance. It's not my thing. I'm going to sit all the way in the back. And I ended up sitting next to Glenn and Amber Schwarm, who are still today incredible real estate investors, incredible real estate investor mentors and everything, just incredible people. Sat next to them in the back row and had that whole conversation like, hey, what do you do? What are you looking to get out of this? And I told them my whole story, and they just said, hey, you should work with investors. We always need leads. And I was like, that's it. It's a sign from the universe. And literally from that moment forward, I have been working with only real estate investors basically all day, every day, ever since. It's been a really wild and challenging and very gratifying journey. So it's been really awesome, really incredible on many levels. And that's how I ended up where I am today, more or less.
Awesome. And I'm grateful for you just elaborating a little bit. It's great to niche down, I think, too. It's important. And it sounds like what you have done in the real estate space. And you've even found a part of that real estate space that's like a whole nother niche, I believe, this AdWords and marketing component, or even niching down into marketing, right? Into a special thing. But one important question before we move on, what instrument did you play?
I am mostly a singer. I play guitar, but only in the air quotes sense of the word play. So I like 5 chords on the guitar. I can hit those 5 chords and still play music today. Like I'm still, I still play music with the same people and love it quite a bit. But, I'm 42 now. My ability to stay up past 9:30 p.m. is extremely limited. So I've got to really pick and choose my battles as far as music goes. But yeah, a singer.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm a drummer, by the way. So
awesome. All right. Drummers are the most valuable person on the stage at any given moment, and there's not a lot of them. So all the props to you, man.
I appreciate that. Well, let's jump in. And what are AdWords? And ultimately, why do we need to know? Why does that affect me as a real estate operator, syndicator, investor? Why should I know? But first, what is it?
Yeah. So Google AdWords, also known as Google Ads, I think actually the technical term is now Google Ads, right? Is Google's ad platform, right? So if you are paying to generate impressions, which are views on ads, you're paying to generate clicks, you are paying to generate leads, either inside Google search, on the YouTube advertising platform, if you are running ads on any number of third-party websites like ESPN.com or CNN.com or the New York Times or whatever that run Google Ads, you are advertising on the Google Ad platform. And for me, Google Ads is probably the single most critical paid acquisition channel that you can run. And it is that way because of the fundamental distinction that makes Google ads, particularly Google search ads. Like if you go into Google, you type something in, you see the ads at the top. What makes those ads unique is that you generally, as the advertiser, as, for example, the investor, don't know anything about the person that's seeing your ad. You don't know what their property is worth. You don't know how much equity they have. You don't know how old they are, right? These are all things you do not see in Google. What you see in Google through the proxy of what they type in is their intent. So unlike, for example, with direct mail, where you are building a list based on whatever criteria you want, right? And you are mailing everyone on this list that matches that criteria, but you have no idea if they have the intent to sell. You just know, for example, maybe their demographics, their neighborhood, you might know something about their equity, you might know something about, they got a certain number of violations or whatever, right? Whatever criteria you have. You know all that stuff about them, but you have no idea if they want to sell, right? In Google, it is the opposite. Where I might not know, for example, how much equity they have or how old they are, but I know if they type in to Google, I need to sell my house. I know they need to sell a house, right? They have intent. And what that does is fundamentally change the average lead quality that you can generate from that channel, right? So Google ads, particularly search ads, tend to close more often. They tend to close more quickly. They tend to be easier to reach. It is just a profoundly powerful channel for reaching people who are ready to go, right? And by all means, that's not the limit of what it can do, but that is what I think attracts real estate investors to Google Ads. And that is what has really made that channel the predominant online marketing channel for investors still to this day. I think even Facebook now is kind of in a decline, I think, as regards to its ad platform. And you've got rising ad platforms like, for example, TikTok or something like that. But Google Ads remains the single most profitable channel for most real estate professionals. And that's because the vast majority of real estate transactions of any type originate on Google. Right? Like if I need to sell a house, I'm at least going to do some research on Google as I get started. If I'm looking to buy a house, I do the exact same thing. So Google as an ad platform occupies this really critical role for most real estate businesses, especially real estate investors. And that's what makes it so special. Now, obviously, name my company AdWords Nerds. I'm clearly a diehard, right? Like this is my baby. So take what I always say, take what I say with a grain of salt, but that would be my argument for why I think real estate investors need to at least understand a little bit about the channel. Yeah, so I think if you have a sense of what kind of audience you are trying to generate, right? Like if you have a sense of, like we were talking about, top of funnel versus bottom of funnel, right? Where top of funnel is they are largely unaware of you. They're doing generalist research. Maybe they're aware they have a problem, right? But they don't know exactly. They're still making a decision. That's all top of funnel type stuff. Bottom of the funnel is I've made a decision. I'm ready to sell. I'm ready to invest. The decision I got to make is who do I do that with? So that's top of funnel, bottom of funnel. If you have a sense of where you want to focus, that is going to open up some strategic possibilities for you and close other ones generally. Right. So one of the things that I'll typically tell people is, like you said, it seems very overwhelming, right? You got a million things to worry about. I will always say, like, in actuality, it is much simpler than you think it is. But the mental model that I found that has really radically changed how I think about this process. We mentioned this before, we were chatting before we started recording. It's called the theory of constraints, right? Theory of constraints was created by this guy, Dr. Eli Goldratt. He was a physicist from Israel. He was sort of, he came over to the States, started working in manufacturing process improvement. He literally had a friend who owned a factory and was like, hey, can you help me improve my factory? And Goldratt came in and said, factories should have sort of scientific operating principles, right? But as a physicist, he also brought this idea of you are not trying to optimize every single tiny piece of a thing, right? You don't, like you mentioned, like I don't have to do my headline and my button and my website and my Google ads and my SEO, my Facebook. I don't have to do all that stuff at once. Goldratt said, what you are optimizing is the system as a whole. So if you back up and you say, okay, my real estate investing business is a system. It is a series of interconnected pieces. And those pieces interact with each other, right? Like my marketing funnel interacts with my acquisitions person. My acquisition person and how they close interacts with my CRM, which interacts with how much money I get in my checking account when I close on a deal, right? These are all interacting pieces. And so Goldratt's insight was that if you view that system as a whole that is designed to produce something, in this case, it's revenue for the investor, there is only ever in that system one thing that most constrains the output. So if you mapped out your whole investing business and you're like, my marketing funnel, my acquisitions person, my back-end processes, the types of deals that I do, the way I close, right? The market, like you put all those things in a line, there's only ever one thing that is most limiting what you get out the back end. And so your only job, if you want to truly optimize that system, is to figure out what that one thing is and fix it. That's it. You don't have to worry about anything else because like a chain, if you imagine a chain, there's always a weakest link in the chain. And if you really pull on that chain as hard as you can on both ends, it's always going to break at the weakest link and never anywhere else. That's where it's going to break. So you could spend all your time making every other link in the chain stronger. It doesn't make the chain any better. You have to make the weakest link stronger. And so to back this up and say, okay, let's bring this down to earth and talk about marketing. In any marketing funnel, there is only ever one thing that is most constraining the flow of leads through that process into your acquisitions person's calendar. There's only one thing. Now, it might be the landing page. It might be the ads that are driving traffic. It might be the cost of the market or whatever, but there's only ever one thing. And so if you know that, the question becomes not how do I handle everything at once? The question becomes, what is my one thing right now? And then what do I do to make that thing better? So for example, if you were saying like, hey, we've got a great back-end system, like our team is amazing, our acquisitions people are great, I know I can get money for deals, I'm crushing it, right? My problem is I need more investors, I need a bigger audience, right? If that's the constraint for you, okay, great. What we're going to do is top of funnel type stuff. I'm going to do a podcast. I'm going to make a YouTube channel. I'm going to get out to the biggest audience possible. If instead you're like, look, I got a big audience. I got my email list. I'm on a bunch of podcasts. I'm very popular. My problem is people are getting over the line and actually putting money down and investing with me. You say, okay, well, we might want to think about the sales pitch that we're using. We might want to think about the medium. Maybe we switch to Zoom instead of phone calls, or maybe we switch to in-person instead of Zoom. Maybe I need to put a different acquisitions person on my team. I'll give you a case study, right? There's a real world example. It's a coaching student of mine, really successful real estate investor in Baltimore. I've been crushing it for years and years and years. And someone who has their back-end logistics so tight, like one of the best operational investors I've ever met. And we were having this conversation. We're talking about their ads because they're running Google ads. And they're like, we're not really getting appointments. Like we're getting views on the ads. We're getting clicks. We're getting leads, but they're not turning into appointments. That's the constraint. Okay. So we start looking at that and say like, all right, is this something with the ads? Is this something with our copy? Is this something with, and then we're like, what about the person who sets the appointments? And it turned out that they had just switched recently from his wife, who had been setting all their appointments previously, who was local, is from the area, knew everywhere, would talk to you, be like, oh, you're at 123 Main Street. That's right by Vinny's Pizza. Like could have that conversation, right? They just switched to an appointment setter from the Philippines. And that appointment center, perfect English, flawless English, but no local knowledge. And what they found was the appointment setting rate dropped off a cliff when they made that change. When they switched back to using his wife to switch appointments, all of a sudden appointments came back, deal flow starts going through again. So if we had spent all our time saying, well, let's test another landing page, not only am I putting in more time and more effort, I am not actually impacting the output of the system. I've got to focus on that one thing wherever it is. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a ton of sense. Yeah. Sometimes finding that one thing can be difficult for me, I know, or figuring out what should be our focus right now, the weakest link, right? There may be 3 weak links, but there's still one that's the weakest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for us, so at Adwords Nerds, right, the way that we try to do this, because we only work with investors, we literally have a map of every investor's lead generation system, which basically starts when someone sees the ad in Google all the way through to when they put money in the investor's checking account through a close, right? So this is or a sale, I should say, right? So that's the system. We map that out, and then we take average performance values at each step of that system across all of our clients every quarter. So we say this quarter, how many views should the average client expect? How many clicks should they expect, right? How many leads should they expect? How many appointments should they expect? How many closes should they expect? How much cash, how much return should they expect? And we get that average, right? We literally track the amount of volatility that those numbers see over time. So we do a standard deviation analysis and say, what are the standard deviations? If you're within one standard deviation, your clicks might be 100 or 80, or they might be 60. Those are all within one standard deviation, statistically expected, whatever. But if you are above or below those in any given point, we say that's the constraint. Which step in the process is the furthest away from the average? And that's how we identify, or try to attempt to identify, what the constraint is in a given moment. It can be a bit of an art rather than a science. Even if all you did was sit down and map out your business as a chain of events and put the numbers in for, on average, this many people come in here, this many people end up over here, this many people end up at the end. Even just by doing that, more often than not, a constraint will start to pop out at you. And if you could just approach things from that perspective, I think most people will find themselves far more effective at actually creating positive change than they think they can be.
Yeah. Tracking the numbers so you know what's happening, right? If you're not tracking it, how can you improve it? This is a great example of that. Even you talking about tracking every piece of the process. I know we have tried to do that in numerous parts of the business, but specifically in this case, investors, we can have so many people coming to our website, but then it's maybe not many signing up this month, or what. I'm like, oh, what happened? What was different than the month before? And that can be difficult for us to figure out. But if we don't track it, there's no way we're going to know. Right. So I love the detail that you're talking about, because I just love how numbers can shape and help us find that weakest link in this case, right? That's so important. Speak about, what an ad campaign is, how this helps us with that. What does that look like? Somebody says an ad campaign, maybe, speak at a kind of a high level, but then go pretty deep. What does that look like for somebody in our business?
Yeah. So the most common ad campaign that investors are going to run, specifically for motivated seller leads, right, which I think is probably the most common application of Google Ads within real estate investing, is going to be a Google search campaign, right? And so essentially what that means is you are targeting people that go into Google and type something in. So I'm going into Google, I'm typing in sell my house or sell my house fast, we buy houses, whatever it is, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a list of keywords I want to target. And I will always tell people that keywords are not what people are typing into Google. They are what you are telling Google you want. And those are two different things. So we don't have to get into necessarily the complexity of there are different types of keywords and they overlap with each other in different ways. But you can basically think of it as the more specific the keywords you put in, the fewer the amount of people you are going to get in front of, and the more focused those people are going to be. So I always say, like, as an example, right? If I go out Friday night and I'm a bachelor and I say, look, I'm going to meet someone tonight. All right, I'm going to meet someone. It's time for me to settle down. All right. And I go in with a set of criteria. And if that set of criteria is, they got to live in the area, that's it, and be available, right? That's my only criteria. I'm going to have a broad swath of people to talk to. There's a lot of people who are going to meet that criteria out on any given Friday night. A big audience, but a lot of variation in that audience. That's a lot of different people. I didn't even specify a gender. So there's a lot. Now, if I go out and I say, okay, I'm going to meet somebody tonight, Friday night, they got to be 6'3", Swedish in origin, brown hair, blue eyes, wears glasses, and likes Joy Division or something, then that is a very specific target. Now, it's a very specific target market. That audience is going to be very small, but they're going to be very focused. So you want to think about, there is a trade-off between audience size and audience focus, or another way of putting that is, there's a trade-off between audience size and lead quality. All right. So we can go broader in our keyword selection, and we are going to get a much bigger audience. We are going to get more, on average, more retail style leads, right? There'll be motivated sellers mixed in there, but there'll be a bunch of retail in there, right? And if you can handle retail leads or profit off those in some way, great, you're off to the races. Similarly, we can go really specific. I only want people who type in exactly sell my house fast in Connecticut. Now I'm getting really specific in terms of who I want. That audience is going to be very small, but the lead quality I get on the other end is going to be significantly higher. There's one other element that you want to think about when you're making these strategic trade-offs, which is that Google Ads is an auction. When I say I'm targeting a keyword, what I'm doing is bidding on the people that search for that keyword and competing in that auction against other advertisers. So there is a sort of corollary effect that happens here. The bigger the audience, the cheaper my leads tend to be. Well, why is that? Well, there is more supply. And anytime there is more supply and the same amount of demand, price goes down. Econ 101. Similarly, if I shrink my audience and I'm only going after the most motivated leads, there is low supply, high demand. That means prices rise on average. So we have generally kind of a spectrum where you've got big audience, lower close rate, lower cost leads over on the left. And then over on the right, you've got small audience, higher cost, higher close rate leads. Okay. So this is the basic sort of strategic division. Now, once you have that, you sort of set your keywords up, sort of make these strategic decisions, you got to write an ad. The way that ad writing works in Google Ads today is we write these things that are called responsive search ads. They are text ads only. You can add little images and stuff if you want, but they generally don't show up a whole ton. It's mostly text ads. If you imagine you type something into Google and you see the search results, they look like that. So you are generally writing ads that are going to appeal to the audience you targeted with your keywords. The more specific you can be in your call to action to them, the more specifically I can speak to them, generally the better they're going to respond. So if I, for example, write an ad, let's say you jump on Google and you're typing in like, what am I going to do with my best podcast and real estate award? I don't know, where am I going to put it? Right. And you just see an ad that says podcasts are great. You're like, all right, cool. But if you see an ad that says Whitney, you have the best podcast in real estate. Click here to win $1 million, right? You're going to click that. It's specific to you. So the more specific the ad copy gets, the higher the response rate. So we have, again, you can start to see how all these pieces, the keywords and the strategy and the ad copy, they start to interact with each other. If you write a really specific ad to a really broad audience, it doesn't necessarily work. Similarly, you write a really broad ad to a really specific audience, doesn't necessarily work. You got to match those things together. And finally, when someone clicks on that ad, you're sending them to a web page, generally your website. I would say you don't really need anything super specific. I generally send leads to people's regular real estate investing websites all the time, although we do design and develop landing pages for our clients. But I say the thing you want to keep in mind is, do you clearly say what you do? You clearly tell the seller why they should work with you, and you give them a clear way to contact you. That's really it. So you got a big old phone number, big obvious form with not too many fields. You got a really compelling headline that tells them why selling to an investor or working with you is going to be awesome. And you're off to the races. Those are the basic components of a Google Ads campaign. It really hasn't changed that much over the last, let's say, 10 years. The specifics change. How the systems work under the hood changes a lot. But in terms of matching your strategy to your keywords, to your ad, to your website, that stuff is basic marketing 101. It's never going to change all that.
Thank you for being with us again today. I hope that you have learned a lot from the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you're telling your friends about the Real Estate Syndication Show and how they can also build wealth in real estate. You can also go to lifebridgecapital.com and start investing today.